All right, welcome to the Joint Subcommittee on General Government. Would the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Goycochea, Senator Harris, Senator Neal, Assemblywoman Backus, Assemblywoman Brown-May, Assemblywoman Kasama, Assemblyman Miller, Assemblyman O'Neill, and Chair Peters.
I am here. Thank you so much. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Please turn off the volume, at least on your digital devices, so we're not interrupting folks as they're speaking. We will have public comment at the end of today. We will go ahead and move into our agenda. We have budget closings for a few budgets, which means we'll be doing a little bit of musical chairs between while we have staff come in and out for those budgets, but we'll go ahead and get started with the Commission on Mineral Resources.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Colby Nichols. I'm a program analyst with LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. I'll be presenting the closing document for the Division of Minerals. It begins on page 3 of your packet. There's one major closing issue associated with this account. This is a recommendation for a new unclassified geographic information systems analyst position. And Governor's recommending reserve reductions of $89,605 in fiscal year 24 and $118,600 in fiscal year 25. Those are for the costs associated with one new unclassified geographic information systems analyst position. The intent of this recommendation is to allow the agency to promote an incumbent field specialist and to create a position that's dedicated solely to GIS-related duties, as the position as the incumbent currently has some other responsibilities, education and outreach related to the Abandoned Mines program. And again, the intent of this recommendation per the agency is to establish a lead worker that would be dedicated to the maintenance, operations, and improvements of the agency's geographic information system functions. Following the budget hearing, fiscal staff inquired whether any additional funding for furniture or computer equipment would be needed, as this decision unit, as recommended by the Governor, did not include any of those costs. The agency confirmed it has sufficient space for the recommended new position. Regarding some of those other operating costs, you'll see that fiscal staff is recommending a minor technical adjustment to insert some costs for computer hardware and software that were inadvertently omitted from the decision unit. As such, the additional computer and software costs, those total $3,002 in fiscal year 24. Those are recommended to be added as a technical adjustment. Inclusive of that adjustment, the revised position and operating costs in this decision unit would total $92,607 in fiscal year 24, and again, $118,641 in fiscal year 25. The Governor's Finance Office and the agency concur with this proposed technical adjustment. So the decision before the subcommittee this morning is whether they wish to recommend approval of one new unclassified geographic information systems analyst position with the associated costs, inclusive of that noted technical adjustment, funded with reserve reductions of $92,607 in fiscal year 24 and $118,641 in fiscal year 25.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Is there any question from the committee? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to recommend as stated by staff.
I make a motion.
Do I have a second? I have a second from Assemblyman Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The motion passes. And just for the record, I forgot to mention Assemblywoman Backus is absent. Excused, please. And we can move on to other closing items.
Great. Again, this is Colby Nichols for the record. Moving on to the other closing items, you'll see there's a table that's at the top of page 5 of your packet. There are 6 other closing items there. In addition, there's a 7th other closing item. That's Budget Amendment A232764219. This was transmitted by the Governor's Finance Office on March 31st, 2023. What the budget amendment is recommending is reserve reductions totaling $74,613 each year of the biennium. Those are for costs associated with including this budget in the Department of Administration's Administrative Services Division cost allocation, also known as ASD. ASD provides budgetary and fiscal service supports to various agencies. The intent of this budget amendment is to essentially account for this budget's share of costs for support from ASD. Regarding other closing items 1 through 6, we would recommend those be closed as recommended by the Governor. Regarding other closing item 7, we would recommend that be closed contingent on the approval of a companion budget amendment. That's companion budget amendment A231071371 for the Administrative Services Division budget, and that budget is also on the agenda for this morning. And then finally, fiscal staff would request authority to make technical adjustments to this budget as needed.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to recommend other closing items 1 through 6 and other closing items 7 as recommended by staff.
I make the motion for the, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm tired. For fiscal staff recommendation for other closing items 1 through 6 and number 7. And the technical adjustments.
Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. I have a second from Assemblyman Miller. Are there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes, and we can move on to the next budget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Morgan Barlow, Program Analyst for the Fiscal Analyst Division of the Legislative Council Bureau. I'll be walking the subcommittee through the Silver State Health Exchange budget and then also part of the Department of Administration budgets. The budget account 1400, the Silver State Health Exchange, is found on page 7 of your closing packet. The Silver State Health Exchange was established to administer a health insurance exchange and facilitate the purchase and sale of qualified health plans pursuant to the Federal Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act and the Federal Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010. Since fiscal year 2020, the agency has been operating as a fully functional state-based exchange. Before the committees were brought 2 major issues: that of the additional brokers and continued support of navigators, as well as a new benefit management position. The governor recommends reserve reductions of approximately $328,000 over the 2023-25 biennium for the continued funding of navigators and the addition of 2 broker entities per fiscal year of the biennium. According to the agency, the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the expenditure levels of currently supported navigators, which is recommended to be restored over the 2023-25 biennium. Additionally, the agency indicated the rural areas of Nevada are underserved and require an increase in number of brokers to provide services to rural areas and aid consumers in making well-informed decisions when purchasing health insurance. As a little background, navigators consist of public and private entities that communicate, educate, and enroll eligible consumers in Affordable Care Act certified qualified plans and publicly funded health care through the multiple enrollment methods provided by the exchange. Brokers consist of public and private entities that sell insurance from multiple companies, including the exchange, and work with consumers to make well-informed purchasing decisions when it comes to insurance. Of the total recommended $327,000 in reserve reductions over the biennium, $30,000 would support 2 additional brokers in fiscal year 2024, and $60,000 in fiscal year 2025 to support 2 additional brokers and those brokers that were added in fiscal year 2024. This would expand the broker program to 9 entities in the first year and 11 entities in the second year of the biennium. The remaining recommended amount of reserve reductions over the biennium would be to match the 2021-23 biennium legislatively approved amount for the continued support of navigators. Through the expansion of the broker program, as recommended by the executive budget, the agency indicated added brokers would aid in the exchange's goal to insure more Nevadans. The decision for the committee is as follows: Does the committee wish to recommend approval of $327,544 in reserve reductions over the 2023 to 25 biennium to support the Navigator and broker programs as recommended by the governor?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion as recommended by staff.
We have a second from Assemblyman Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That motion passes. We can move on to the next closing item.
The next closing item before the subcommittee is the new benefit manager position. The governor recommends approximately $190,000 in reserve reductions over the 2023-25 biennium to fund one new full-time unclassified benefit manager position and associated expenditures to begin in July of 2023. The agency indicates the operations unit of the exchange lacks a support position to adequately manage brokers associated with the state-based exchange program. The recommended new benefit manager position would assume the role as a broker liaison to the exchange's approximately 700 certified brokers. According to the agency, the benefits manager position would serve as an enrollment and eligibility subject matter expert, provide brokers with information on policy and grant opportunities, train and certify brokers, and provide customer service. According to the agency, the current field operations unit benefit manager performs parallel responsibilities but acts as a navigator liaison. The decision before the subcommittee is as follows. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $190,225 in reserve reductions over the 2023-25 biennium to support one new unclassified benefit manager position and associated expenditures beginning in fiscal year 2024 as recommended by the governor, contingent upon review and consideration of the payable by the money committees?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to accept recommendations by staff.
I have a second from Assemblyman Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion passes. We can move on to other closing items.
Other closing items for the Silver State Health Exchange is found on page 11 of your packets. There are 6 other items that are listed. These did not raise any significant concerns. And so fiscal staff recommends other closing items 1 through 6 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept the recommendation for other closing items.
And a second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That motion passes. And we'll move into the next budget.
Once again, Morgan Barlow, Program Analyst for the record. We are now moving into the Department of Administration. Of the 12 accounts that comprise the department, I will be presenting the first 3, which are staff closed. And then after I present the 3, we will have a summary page for one singular motion for the staff closed budgets. And then my esteemed colleague Yuri Yakovlev will come and present the remaining budgets. Once again, staff closed budgets are those budgets that have not had any significant issues or significant information items identified. These budgets have not been previously heard before the subcommittee. Fiscal staff is responsible for developing the recommendations for these closing budgets. And as I mentioned, there is a summary page for these first 3 budgets on page 21, which will contain the singular motion. And then additionally, there's another summary page at the end of the packet for those budgets that my colleague will present. Starting with budget account 1017 on page 13, which is the Deferred Compensation Committee budget. The Nevada Deferred Compensation Program is a voluntary tax-deferred supplemental retirement savings program for employees of the state of Nevada and local governments. The budget is primarily supported through fees collected and plan providers and from plan providers and beneficiaries. There are no major closing issues with 2 other closing items identified. Closing recommendations for this budget and the subsequent budgets once again are found on the summary page. I'm happy to pause or move on if there's no questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can move on.
Moving on to page 15 of the closing packet is the budget account 1354. This is the budget account for fleet services, which provides ground transportation services for state employees and operates a fleet of approximately 12,000 vehicles dispersed throughout the state. There are no major closing items identified for this budget, with 2 other items identified. I will note out other item number 2, which is the governor recommends reserve reductions in each year of the biennium to fund the installation of a tracking system to new vehicles recommended to be purchased with one-time general fund appropriations, which will be heard at a later date. Happy to pause or move on.
Any questions? Yep, Senator Gogochia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And of those 12,000 vehicles, I think that's what you said, 12,000. Does that include like highway patrol vehicles, NDOT's vehicles, or are they separate?
No, those do not.
Not included in the 12,000.
I don't think so.
There's no, I don't know where the 12,000, there's not 12,000.
Yeah, that's right. I thought there was only 1,200, it said, or so in the fleet vehicles in the notes.
Yeah, there's 1,200, not
Right,
12,000.
yeah, okay. I
Oh,
thought he
okay.
said 12,000. I'm sorry.
Not-
Okay.
That's about
Yeah,
1,200.
yeah, and I was going to say at 12,000, that'd have to be everything we own. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. The number, I believe, is correct in our notes. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we can move on.
Moving on to page 19, budget account 1356, the fleet services capital purchasing budget. This budget serves as the holding account for the accumulation of funds realized from vehicle sales, insurance recoveries from vehicles totaled in accidents, depreciation allowances for fleet replacement, and appropriations used to purchase vehicles. So there were no major closing issues or other items identified for this budget.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can move on to the summary page.
The summary page for these budgets are found on page 21. As previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for the following budgets. Fiscal staff recommends that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary. 101-1017, Deferred Compensation Committee. 711-1354, Fleet Services, including the approval of other closing item 2 being contingent upon approval of related legislation, and 711-1356, Fleet Services Capital Purchase.
Are there any questions? I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept fiscal staff recommendations for the following budgets as to be closed by the governor, recommended by the governor, and request authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
And those budgets are listed on the summary page. Do I have a second? Second. A second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes, and we can move on to the next set of budgets. We will pause for a second. Welcome. We will come back to budget 1015.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Yuri Yakovlev, LCB Fiscal Analysis Division. I'll be presenting the closing documents for 9 more Department of Administration budgets, the first 5 of which were previously heard by the subcommittee on February 23rd and March 9th. As indicated, the Hearings and Appeals Division is first and starts on page 23. The governor recommends an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund of $111,678 over the 2023-25 biennium for one new administrative assistant position to serve as a scheduling clerk for the hearings office in Las Vegas. Prior to the budget hearing, the agency indicated one supervising legal secretary position was responsible for scheduling new hearing requests, which are statutorily required to be scheduled within 30 days of receiving the request. The single position schedules over 1,000 hearings per month, has had backlogs in the past of 3,000 requests needing to be scheduled, and at times, new requests were scheduled 120 days after receipt, and the position struggles performing their regular supervisory duties. The table at the top of page 24 provides the increase in hearing requests received by the agency over the past 5 fiscal years. The agency attributes the increase to the growth in the state's population, employees returning to the workplace after the COVID-19 pandemic, and de facto claim denials. During the hearing, the agency testified insurance companies have their own 30-day statutory deadline to decide on a workers' compensation claim. If the deadline is missed, it results in a de facto denial, which individuals usually appeal to the hearings office. And the agency indicated these denials comprise 40% of new hearing requests received. Additionally, during the current biennium, the Interim Finance Committee approved 2 new legal secretary positions to assist with the agency's caseload and help process new hearing requests. During the budget hearing, the agency testified those positions were unable to assist due to having to cover the responsibilities of other vacant legal secretaries. Furthermore, the agency indicated they were able to utilize budget savings to hire contract positions, which did help them get under the 30-day requirements. However, without the contract positions or a new administrative assistant, the agency indicated it would be at risk of noncompliance again. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving an allocation from the Workers' Compensation and Safety Fund totaling $111,678 over the 2023-25 biennium for one new administrative assistant position as recommended by the governor?
Are there any questions on this budget or item? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to accept fiscal staff's recommendation as cited in the document.
Second.
I have a second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes. And we'll go into other closing items.
Yuri Yakula for the record. There are 2 other closing items on page 25, and fiscal staff recommends that other closing item 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Are there any questions on these other closing items? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to accept fiscal staff recommendations for other closing items 1 and 2 and request authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
A second from Assemblyman Miller. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes. We can move on to the next budget.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. The next budget is the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records on page 27. The major closing issue is the transfer of a document management system to the Enterprise Information Technology Services Division. The agency currently has a contract with a vendor to use an electronic document management system called OnBase, which allows for the storage of documents in one central location. This started as a pilot program to determine the feasibility of large-scale use of this type of system and has since expanded with multiple state agencies utilizing the system through Archives and Public Records contract. The agency indicated further use and expansion of the system would be better handled through an enterprise service provided by EATS because the agency staff cannot handle the additional workload of more agencies joining the contract, which was reiterated during the budget hearing. Specifically, every time a new agency wants to participate in the existing contract, staff have to create interlocal agreements, amend the original contract with the vendor, submit work programs to the IFC, and then handle the collection and remittance of payments from participating agencies to the vendor. As indicated, Archives and Public Records receives transfers from participating state agencies to fund their portion of the contract. The decision unit inadvertently reduces general fund appropriations rather than eliminating the transfer revenues. Therefore, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to eliminate the general fund reduction and reduce transfers from other state agencies by $260,188 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend transferring the on-base document management system from the Nevada State Library Archives and Public Records to EATS with the noted technical adjustment, thereby reducing interagency transfers in this budget by $260,188 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept fiscal staff's recommendation.
Second?
A second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That motion passes, and we can move on to other closing items.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. Below the decision box on the top of page 29 in the Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Funds section, it is noted the agency anticipates utilizing all remaining funding associated with an inmate case file project in fiscal year 24 rather than between fiscal year 24 and 25 as recommended by the governor. So fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase federal ARPA funds transferred from the COVID-19 relief program's budget by $21,691 in fiscal year 24 and eliminate the $21,691 in fiscal year 25 with corresponding adjustments to ARPA expenditures. This budget also has two other closing items, with other item 2 being contingent on one of the one-time general fund appropriations noted on page 30. So fiscal staff recommends that other closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing item 2 be closed contingent upon approval of legislation for one-time general fund appropriations for the agency to transition from microfilm to digitization services. The coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds be closed with the noted technical adjustment and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. I have to admit that it will be a sad day when the next generation does not get to explore microfilm at our state libraries. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept fiscal staff's recommendations for other closing items as stated.
Second?
And a second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? That motion passes, and we can move on to the next budget, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yuri Yakovlev for the record. On page 31 is the Risk Management Division. This budget has 5 other closing items. In other closing item 3, staff has noted the expenditure authority for workers' compensation expenditures in the governor's recommended budget is low and does not reflect the agency's projections in the upcoming biennium. Therefore, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase workers' compensation expenditure authority by $6.7 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium. If the adjustments are made to increase expenditures, this would put the agency far below the recommended reserve level, so further adjustments are needed to increase the workers' compensation revenues, which would increase the workers' compensation rate collected by the agency. The rate increase will be discussed during the closing of statewide decision units, since the workers' compensation rate is a statewide rate. Regarding other closing item 4, there is a similar situation where the authority for the excess liability policy expenditures is not sufficient. This is reimbursed directly by the Attorney General Tort Claims Fund and not a statewide rate. So fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase excess liability expenditure authority by $352,673 in fiscal year 24 and by $402,047 in fiscal year 25, and increase fund transfers from the Attorney General Tort Claims Fund by $103,618 in fiscal year 25 and $333,821 in fiscal year 25. Other closing item 5 deals with other rate and revenue technical adjustments. As noted on the table at the top of page 33, the miscellaneous insurance policy revenues need to be increased primarily due to cyber liability insurance increases. To ensure sufficient revenue authority is budgeted, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase miscellaneous insurance policy reimbursement revenues by $815,505 in fiscal year '24 and $827,213 in fiscal year '25. The revenue needed for the aviation policy within the state needs to increase slightly, so fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase aviation insurance policy reimbursement revenues by $8,647 in fiscal year '24 and $12,034 in fiscal year '25. And finally, there are other adjustments needed to statewide rates for the vehicle comp and collision and the employee bond policies, but those will be discussed with the other statewide rates. We do not recommend a change to the property and contents rate, which is a statewide rate, but the revenue authority in this budget is comprised of that statewide rate as well as direct transfers from specific budgets for a supplemental large equipment policy, which the agency indicates is lower than the recommended amount in the governor's budget. So fiscal staff recommends a decrease to property and contents insurance policy reimbursement revenues by $305,344 in fiscal year '24 and $317,910 in fiscal year '25, with a corresponding decrease in reserves. Moving on to the decision box on page 34, fiscal staff recommends that other closing items 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor. Other closing items 3 through 5 be closed with the noted technical adjustments. Recommended changes to statewide rates be deferred for consideration and discussed during the statewide decision unit's closing, where other statewide rate changes will be considered, and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Wow. Somebody's ready to go. Okay, so I make the motion as recommended by fiscal staff.
That was a second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The motion passes, and we can move on to the next budget, please.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. Next is the purchasing division on page 35. There are 2 major closing issues. The first is a recommendation to reduce reserves by $489,097 for 3 new classified positions to address the increased workload associated with 3 responsibilities the agencies absorbed around fiscal year '27 and 2018. First was the Preferred Purchase Program, which was transferred from the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation. Through this program, the agency qualifies vendors that employ individuals with disabilities, and then those vendors can contract directly with state agencies without the need for solicitation. However, due to the other 2 new responsibilities, the agency testified during the hearing that it provided minimal outreach to expand the program through fiscal year '20 and has not been able to provide outreach since. The second new responsibility was the agency being put in charge of processing direct client service agreements, which were previously overseen by individual state agencies. Purchasing Division is now responsible for assisting vendors that are unfamiliar with the process in submitting quotes, training state agencies in the process due to those agencies' own internal turnover, and process hundreds of agreements per year. Finally, the third new responsibility was the authorization for the agency to start assessing an administrative fee on statewide contracts, or master service agreements as we refer to them in the packet. That fee now accounts for basically half of the agency's revenue, and vendors are required to submit a quarterly report on the amount they were paid through a master service agreement, which then determines the amount of the fee they need to turn around and pay to the agency. However, staff that oversee the collection of the fee do not have time to validate every report submitted by vendors, so it's basically an honor system. And the agency testified the state accounting system does not have the functionality to provide real-time monitoring. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of reserve reductions of $489,097 over the 2023-25 biennium for 1 new purchasing officer, 1 new purchasing technician, and 1 new management analyst position as recommended by the governor?
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept staff's recommendations as stated.
A second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. And that motion passes. We can move on to the next closing item.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. The second closing issue starts on page 37, which is funding for the Southern Nevada warehouse space associated with personal protective equipment. As background information, the Division of Emergency Management oversaw warehouse operations during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then management of the warehouse transferred to the Purchasing Division at the beginning of fiscal year 23 as the pandemic wound down. The IFC approved funding the warehouse lease with coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds during the current biennium, and the governor recommends $1.4 million in state fiscal recovery funds to continue leasing the warehouse space in fiscal year 24 and 25, which is Decision Unit E350. The $1.4 million would fund the warehouse lease through the first 6 months of fiscal year 25, with the anticipation that the one-time general fund appropriation noted on page 40 would be approved for the agency to purchase a new warehouse and move out by that time. The governor also recommends eliminating the funding in the budget associated with the fiscal year 23 allocation for the lease, which expires on June 30th, 2023, and is Decision Unit E490. Additionally, during the 2021-23 interim, the IFC approved state fiscal recovery funds for one new program officer position to manage the warehouse, along with funding for contract positions and warehouse operating expenditures. The program officer position is included in the base budget with a change in funding source rather than being included in an enhancement unit for the subcommittee's consideration. The budget also does not include funding or expenditure authority for the contract positions and warehouse operating expenditures. Through conversations with the agency, it was indicated there are estimated savings from the IFC-approved allocation of state fiscal recovery funds, not the funding associated with the lease, that the agency will balance forward to fiscal year 25 and then submit a work program for the IFC's consideration for additional funding when needed. Moving on to page 39, does the subcommittee wish to A, increase federal coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds by $1.4 million over the 2023-25 biennium to fund the lease for the space associated with storing personal protective equipment at the Southern Nevada warehouse, and B, eliminate federal coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds of $856,172 associated with the Southern Nevada warehouse lease that would expire on June 30th, 2023, and C, change the funding source of one program officer position from federal coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds to reserves.
Are there any questions? Senator Gocochea.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I guess I'm just looking at this, and we probably need someone from the agency, but how much personal protective, I would assume there's a mountain of masks and gloves and down there. What are we going to do with this? Clearly, some of this stuff would be dated. I'm just kind of wondering, you know, what we're dealing with. We're talking about leasing a warehouse into the future for maybe equipment we don't need or will be dated, eventually go away, or should go away.
Yeah, I think we talked about some of that during the committee, the hearing on the budget. We have some folks up from the Department of Admin, but staff has offered to answer part of that, and we can go to the representatives from the division when we're ready.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. The one-time general fund appropriations on page 40, the warehouse space associated with that would just be for the federal surplus program. The anticipation is that the personal protective equipment would all be either distributed or disposed of by that time.
All right, I thank you. So then, actually, we will get out from under this by the time we hit the 23, by the 23 budget year, or do we have to continue on to 24?
The funding is through the first 6 months of fiscal year 25, so either by then or earlier. Yuri Yakovlev for the record.
All right, I thank you. I just wanted to get it clear in my mind exactly how far we were going and what we're going to do with it. Thank you.
We good? All right, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion to accept staff's recommendation as stated.
With the second from Assemblyman Miller, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion passes. We can move on to other closing items.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. There are two other closing items. As noted in other item 2, the governor recommends the agency budget for Bank of America procurement card reimbursement revenues of $243,087 in each year of the biennium to potentially decrease the purchasing assessment. Currently, the governor's finance office and the agency distribute rebate reimbursements to agencies that utilize purchase cards. However, Bank of America is no longer providing the data needed to determine the distribution, so utilizing historical information is not only somewhat inaccurate, but very labor-intensive. And fiscal staff recommends that other closing items 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on other closing items.
I make a motion to accept other closing items as stated by staff.
The second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes, and we can move on to the next budget.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. The Administrative Services Division is on page 41. This is the final budget that was previously heard by the subcommittee. The first major closing issue is a recommendation to add administrative charge revenues totaling $337,050 over the biennium for 1 new accounting assistant and 1 new management analyst position to support the capital improvement program team. The team is currently comprised of 5 positions that process CIP-related transactions. The governor's recommended budget includes 98 CIP projects with total funding of $1.2 billion, which is a 208% increase compared to the average funding approved by the legislature for CIP projects per biennium over the last 3 biennia. The agency indicates this would lead to an increased workload for the team. Additionally, CIPs are funded with a combination of state and federal funds that require the funding to be received and expended in a timely manner. So if the CIP team does not process transactions timely, that could lead to an increase in project costs, as vendors would be statutorily entitled to interest on the payment, and the potential for federal grant funding being rescinded. During the budget hearing, the agency indicated that each position in the team has a dedicated role. For example, the data entry is complex and handled by 1 individual. So if that individual is not available, other staff cannot step in to perform the duties. The agency also indicated the new positions would allow the management analyst that oversees the team to focus on management oversight rather than performing CIP transaction-related tasks. Staff would note the decision unit was submitted without a schedule in the budgeting software being processed, which resulted in certain expenditures being under or overstated. So fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase operating expenditures by $482 and decrease information service expenditures by $318 over the 2023-25 biennium, which would result in a net decrease of $164 in reserves. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving administrative charges totaling $337,050 over the 2023-25 biennium for 1 new accounting assistant position and 1 new management analyst position for the capital improvement program team, including the noted technical adjustment?
Thank you. Yeah, not having those redundancies in staff and the cross-training with staff can really put us at risk. So I appreciate the request here. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept staff's recommendations as stated.
Do I have a second? A second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. And that motion passes. We can move on to the next closing item.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. Major closing issue 2 is at the bottom of page 42 and was not previously heard by the subcommittee. After the initial budget hearing, the governor's finance office submitted 2 budget amendments meant to address the current workload and projected workload in the budget team and accounting team within the division. The first budget amendment recommends administrative charges totaling $395,778 for 2 new budget analyst positions, which is discussed on page 43. The budget team currently has 7 positions that provide fiscal and budgetary services for 71 budgets for client agencies, which are traditionally smaller budgets that do not have fiscal staff of their own. The agency indicates the current workload does not allow the existing staff to dedicate enough time to properly analyze and oversee their assigned budgets to ensure agencies do not exceed budgetary authority and are fiscally sound, resulting in staff operating in a reactive state. Additionally, positions from other areas of the agency have been pulled in the past to provide assistance. If approved, the agency would redistribute the workload as indicated in the table on page 44. And as previously noted, the additional staff would allow the agency to also address a projected workload. This is in reference to 3 new client agencies that the agency would support in the upcoming biennium, resulting in 7 more budgets for staff to oversee. Minerals was one of the new client agencies previously mentioned in this meeting. If these positions are not approved, the agency indicated it would either not provide services to the 3 new clients or limit the services provided. Additionally, this budget amendment has a similar issue where a schedule was not processed, so fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to increase operating expenditures by $482 and decrease information service expenditures by $318 over the 2023 biennium, with a net decrease of $164 in reserves. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving Budget Amendment A23107-1371, which recommends administrative charge revenues totaling $395,778 over the 2023-25 biennium for 2 new budget analyst positions, including the noted technical adjustment?
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept staff's recommendations as stated.
A second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes. We can move on to the next issue.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. The second budget amendment would reclassify an accounting assistant 2 to an accounting assistant 3 to support the accounting team. They have 10 positions, 4 of which process accounts payable for the 71 client budgets, which is about 72,000 expense transactions per year. If the reclass is approved, the position would assist the existing Level 3 accounting assistants in processing complex transactions and address the workload associated with the 7 new client budgets. The agency also indicates the reclass position would assist in retention as they have had difficulties filling the position due to the associated pay. Specifically, this position has been vacant 6 times since fiscal year 20. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving Budget Amendment A23108-1371, which recommends administrative charge revenues totaling $14,685 over the 2023-25 biennium to reclass an existing accounting assistant 2 position to an accounting assistant 3 position?
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept staff's recommendations as stated.
Do I have a second? Thank you, Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. That motion passes. We can move on to other closing items.
Yuri Yakovlev for the record. There are 3 other closing items. In other item 2, the agency provided revised computer equipment replacement information, so fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to correct the funding for computer hardware and software replacements, which would reduce reserves by $822 in fiscal year 24 and increase reserves by $2,401 in fiscal year 25, resulting in a net increase in reserves totaling $1,579 over the 2023-25 biennium. And in other item 3, it's related to the agency's overall reserves. The governor's recommended budget has a reserve balance below the agency's target of 60 days. Inclusive of the budget amendments in major closing issue 2 and technical adjustments that were noted throughout this document, revenues would need to increase by $444,217, which would meet the target level and represent an overall of 7.2% increase for contributing agencies. If the budget amendments were not approved, revenues would need to increase by $33,278 to meet the level, representing a 0.5% increase to contributing agencies. So fiscal staff requests authority to make technical adjustments to increase administrative charges based on the subcommittee's decision in major closing item 2 to meet the recommended 60-day level of reserves in this budget. Fiscal staff recommends that other closing item 1 be closed as recommended by the governor, other closing item 2 be closed with the noted technical adjustments, other closing item 3 be closed with the authority for staff to make technical adjustment to increase administrative charges based on the subcommittee's decision in major closing item 2, and request authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
I make the motion to accept fiscal staff's recommendations as stated.
A second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? I did ask staff about the potential downstream impacts of the 7.2% increase based on our recommendation to approve the amendments, the budget amendments in previous budget items, and was assured that the increases were not super significant. However, as the staff makes adjustments to those, we can track and make sure we're not affecting anyone in a significant way. So any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. And the motion passes. And we can move on to staff closing budgets.
Yuri Yaakov for the record. I will now begin presenting the budgets which the subcommittee has not previously reviewed for the Department of Administration and for which fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations. I will pause following my presentation of each budget to allow for questions. When I have presented the last budget in the group and questions have been addressed, the chair may wish to ask for a single motion for closing consideration, which is noted on page 55. The Nevada State Library and Archives Imaging and Preservation Services Equipment/Software budget is on page 47. This budget funds equipment replacements for the IPS program in the Archives and Public Records budget. There are no major closing issues or other closing items.
Any questions? Seeing none, we can move on.
Yuri Yaakov for the record. The Nevada State Library and Archives State Library budget is on page 49, which provides a range of information services such as research for state agencies and public libraries, as well as services for people with disabilities. The agency also houses the State Data Center and State Publications Distribution Center. This budget has 4 other items. Other item 3 is a reclassification of 2 librarian positions to align duties, and this is a cost-neutral recommendation, so there is no impact on the budget. Other item 4 notes the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation has a decision unit that would subgrant $48,000 to the agency, which would be utilized to support the Nevada Career Explorer system. However, there is no companion decision unit in this budget. Therefore, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to establish transfers of supporting and advancing Nevada's dislocated individuals grant funds of $48,000 in fiscal year '24 from the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation budget with a corresponding increase in expenditures contingent upon the subcommittee's recommendation in the Office of Workforce Innovation budget, which the Human Services Joint Subcommittee recommended approval of during the budget closing yesterday.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can move on to the next budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Nevada State Library and Archives Library Cooperative budget is on page 51. This is a regional network of public, school, and academic libraries that plan, develop, share, operate, and maintain services for the management of automated library functions for the public and provides technological services to 35 locations around the state. There is one other closing item.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can move on to the next budget.
Yuri Yaakov for the record. Finally, the Federal Surplus Property Program is on page 53. The program provides state agencies access to federal surplus properties such as vehicles and emergency response equipment. There are no closing issues or other items.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, we can go over the summary page.
Yuri Yaakov for the record. As previously noted, fiscal staff is responsible for developing closing recommendations for the following budgets. Fiscal staff recommends that the following budgets be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make other technical adjustments as necessary. Budget account 1053, the Nevada State Library and Archives IPS equipment software. 2891, the State Library, including the technical adjustment, other closing item 4, to establish transfers of supporting and advancing Nevada's dislocated individuals grant funds of $48,000 fiscal year 24 from the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation budget, with a corresponding increase in expenditures contingent on the subcommittee's recommendation in the Office of Workforce Innovation budget. 2895, the Nevada State Library and Archives Library Cooperative, and 1367, the Federal Surplus Property Program.
Are there any questions? I would entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I make the motion to accept fiscal staff's recommendations as stated.
And a second from Assemblyman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The motion passes. And that brings us to the end of our budget closing agenda item, and we will move into public comment. We will take public comment in our physical locations, and then on the phone. If you would like to provide public comment, please come up to the desks. Please remember to state your name for the record. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Diane Baker. I represent the Nevada Library Association. I provided some comments for you already. I don't need to reread those. But I do want to encourage that the committee continue to consider the State Library and Archives several budgets that do pass through and specifically benefit individual libraries. Excuse me. And from there also, the other budgets that support statewide programs that actually touch each individual with a library card in Nevada. And finally, for funding for the rural bookmobiles, which reach some of our most remote individuals that don't have a tie and ability to get to the specific locations that are in our many counties. And with that, please consider investing in Nevada libraries, one of your most important resources, and it's actually your best bang for your buck out there. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I believe everyone has received the printout of those additional comments that were referred to. Seeing no other public comment in Carson City and seeing no one in Las Vegas, BPS, would you check the public line for public comment today?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of our day today. Thank you all for being here. We appreciate you coming in on 8 a.m. on a Friday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week.